Good evening all, and welcome back to Paranoia Files. Tonight I bring you 8 deeply unsettling accounts from the vast and isolated landscapes of Alberta, where the prairies stretch endlessly and the mountain shadows conceal more than just wildlife. In this episode, we will journey through the most disturbing true crime cases to emerge from this seemingly peaceful Canadian province. Stories that have been whispered about in small towns, buried in cold case files and carried by those who survived encounters they can never forget. These are tales of vanishings without explanation, of cults that twisted belief into control, of predators who hunted in plain sight, and of crimes so strange that they blur the line between the natural and the supernatural. Each story you will hear tonight has been meticulously researched and drawn from real events, real investigations, and real testimonies from those who experienced the unthinkable. To protect the privacy of survivors and the families of victims, certain names and identifying details have been carefully altered. But the essence of each account remains disturbingly intact. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Paranoia Files for daily true crime and horror content that will haunt your thoughts long after the video ends. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness of the prairies reaches out to share its secrets. Now let us begin with a story that starts in one of the most beautiful places in Alberta and ends in a mystery that has never been solved. I have always found comfort in the mountains. There is something about the way they stand silent and ancient against the sky that makes you feel small in a good way. Like your problems do not matter as much when you are standing in front of something that has existed for millions of years. I grew up in Calgary with my younger brother Nathan, and every summer our family would drive out to the Rockies to hike and camp and breathe in air that tasted like pine and snow even in July. Nathan loved those trips more than I did. He would spend the entire drive with his face pressed against the window, watching the flat prairies gradually give way to foothills and then to those massive peaks that looked like they were holding up the sky itself. When Nathan turned 23, he had just finished his degree in environmental science, and he wanted to celebrate by doing a solo backpacking trip through Banff National Park. He had been planning it for months, mapping out trails and campsites, reading every guidebook he could find about the area. I remember sitting at our parents' kitchen table while he spread out his maps and showed me the route he was going to take. He was so excited that his hands were shaking a little as he traced the paths with his finger. Moraine Lake was going to be his base camp. He planned to spend 3 nights there and do day hikes to the surrounding peaks. I told him it sounded amazing. I told him to be careful. I told him to text me every night so I would know he was safe. That was in August of 2019. The weather was perfect that week. Clear skies and warm days and cool nights that were ideal for camping. Nathan left on a Thursday morning and sent me a picture from the trailhead around 10 in the morning. He was grinning in that way he always did when he was truly happy, wearing his blue backpack and his old hiking boots that he refused to replace even though the soles were practically falling off. The next text I got from him was that evening around 7. He had reached Moraine Lake and set up his tent. He sent me a photo of the lake at sunset, the water so blue it looked unreal, like someone had edited the color to be more saturated than nature could ever actually produce. He said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He said he felt like he was the only person in the world. I texted him back telling him I was jealous and to stay safe. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was the last normal message I ever got from him. The next day was Friday. I was at work when my phone buzzed around noon. It was Nathan. The message said he was going to hike up to Sentinel Pass and that he would check in later. I sent back a quick response telling him to have fun. Then around 3 in the afternoon, I got another text from him. This one was different. It just said, "Evelyn, did you know there are other trails here that are not on the map?" I thought it was strange that he phrased it that way. not as a question, but as a statement. I wrote back asking what he meant. He did not respond. I tried not to worry. Cell service in the mountains is unpredictable at best, and I figured he had probably lost signal. But when I did not hear from him by 9 that night, I started calling. Every call went straight to voicemail. I told myself he was fine, that his phone had died, that he was probably already asleep in his tent and I would hear from him in the morning. I did not sleep well that night. I kept waking up and checking my phone to see if he had messaged me. He had not. By Saturday afternoon, I was panicking. I called the Parks Canada emergency line and explained that my brother had been hiking solo near Moraine Lake and that I had not heard from him in over 24 hours. They told me they would send rangers out to check the registered campsites. I gave them all the information I had, his planned route, his campsite number, a description of what he was wearing. Then I called my parents. My mom started crying immediately. My dad said he was getting in the car and driving out there right now. The rangers found Nathan's tent on Saturday evening. It was still set up at his designated campsite right on the shore of Moraine Lake. The tent was zipped closed from the outside. Inside, they found his sleeping bag neatly rolled up, his camp stove, his food bag hanging properly from a tree to keep it away from bears, and his hiking boots placed side by side just inside the tent entrance. It looked like he had come back from a hike, taken off his boots, and then left the tent to do something. But he was gone. His wallet was there, his car keys were there, his water bottle was there. The only thing missing was Nathan himself and his phone. They started a full search and rescue operation on Sunday morning. Dozens of volunteers combed the trails around Moraine Lake. They brought in search dogs. They used helicopters to scan the area from above. I drove out with my parents and we stayed in a hotel in Lake Louise, waiting for news, any news. The rangers told us that the area around Moraine Lake is very popular and well-trafficked. If Nathan had gotten injured on one of the main trails, someone would have found him by now. But they kept searching. On Monday afternoon, 3 days after Nathan's last message to me, a hiker found his phone. It was lying in the middle of a trail that led away from Moraine Lake in the opposite direction from Sentinel Pass, where Nathan had said he was going. The phone was face down in the dirt, the screen cracked but still functional. The battery was dead. They brought it back to the ranger station and charged it, and then they called me. They asked if I knew Nathan's passcode. I did. We had always known each other's passcodes in case of emergency. I gave it to them over the phone and then I waited. 20 minutes later, a ranger called me back. His voice sounded strange, careful, like he was choosing each word with extreme caution. He said they had found something on Nathan's phone that they wanted me to hear. He said I should probably sit down first. I sat down on the hotel bed and gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The ranger told me that there was a voice memo recorded on Nathan's phone at 2:17 in the afternoon on Friday, about an hour before he had sent me that strange text about trails not on the map. He asked if I wanted him to play it for me. I said yes. There was a rustling sound first, like the phone being pulled out of a pocket. Then I heard Nathan's breathing. He was breathing hard, like he had been walking fast or maybe running. Then his voice, quiet and shaky in a way I had never heard before. He said, "I am on a trail that is not on any of my maps. I have been following it for about 20 minutes. There are markers along the path, cairns made of stacked rocks, but they are old, really old, covered in lichen. I have not seen another person, but I keep hearing footsteps behind me. Every time I turn around, there is nobody there, but I can hear them. I can hear someone walking exactly in rhythm with my own steps. And the trees here, they are wrong. They are all dead, but they are still standing, rows and rows of them on both sides of this trail. And they have marks carved into them. Symbols I do not recognize. I am going to keep recording while I walk." There was silence for almost a full minute except for the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel and Nathan's breathing getting faster. Then his voice again, barely a whisper. "Evelyn, if you are listening to this, if something happens to me, I need you to know. They are not what they look like. I thought they were other hikers at first. I thought I was catching up to a group ahead of me on the trail, but when I got closer I saw they are wearing the wrong clothes. Old clothes. Clothes from like 100 years ago maybe. And they are not moving right. Their legs bend at the wrong angles when they walk. There are 5 of them and they keep looking back at me and their faces." His voice broke. "Their faces are wrong, Evelyn. Their mouths are too wide. I am turning back now. I am going back to camp. I am getting out of here tomorrow morning first thing." The recording ended. I sat there holding the phone to my ear even though there was nothing but silence now. The ranger asked if I was still there. I asked him if they had searched the trail Nathan was describing. He said they had searched every trail within a 10-mile radius of Moraine Lake. There was no trail matching that description. There were no dead trees marked with symbols. There were no cairns that old. I told him that did not make sense, that Nathan would not have made it up, that he had clearly been somewhere. The ranger said very quietly that he believed me. He said they were going to keep searching. They searched for 2 more weeks. They never found Nathan. They never found any trace of where he had gone after leaving his phone on that trail. The case is still open. Officially, he is listed as a missing person, presumed dead due to exposure or accident in the wilderness. But I know what I heard on that recording. I know my brother's voice when he is terrified. And I know he saw something out there that he could not explain. I went back to Moraine Lake exactly 1 year after Nathan disappeared. I do not know what I was hoping to find. Maybe some sense of closure. Maybe some sign that he was still out there somewhere. I hiked the same trails he had planned to hike. I looked for cairns, for dead trees, for anything that matched what he had described. I found nothing. But on my last day there, as I was standing at the edge of the lake watching the sun set and turn the water that impossible shade of blue, I heard something behind me. Footsteps on gravel, crunching in rhythm, getting closer. I turned around and there was nobody there. But I could still hear them. I could hear someone walking toward me even though I was completely alone. And then I heard whistling. A tune I recognized immediately because Nathan used to whistle it all the time when we were kids, this old folk song our grandmother had taught us. The whistling was coming from the direction of the tree line, from somewhere in the shadows between the pines. I called out Nathan's name. The whistling stopped. The footsteps stopped. Everything went completely silent in that way that mountains sometimes do, where even the wind seems to hold its breath. I left Moraine Lake that evening and I have not been back since. But every year on the anniversary of Nathan's disappearance, I receive a text from his phone number, the number that was deactivated years ago. The phone that is sitting in an evidence box somewhere in a Parks Canada office. The text is always the same. It just says, "They are still here." I have tried responding. I have tried calling. Nothing ever goes through. But the messages keep coming. The rangers tell me it must be some kind of technical glitch, some artifact of the cellular network bouncing old data around. They tell me it is not really Nathan. But I know my brother. And I think he is trying to warn me. I think he found something in those mountains that was never meant to be found. Something that has been there longer than the trails we walk on. Longer than the parks we carved out of the wilderness. Something that exists in the spaces between the paths we know and the places we have never mapped. I still have that recording saved on my own phone. Sometimes late at night I listen to it again, trying to hear something I missed the first time. Some clue about where he went or what he saw. And every time I listen, I notice something new. In the background, underneath Nathan's voice, there is another sound. It is very faint, but once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. It sounds like laughter, not human laughter. Something older and colder and utterly devoid of anything resembling joy. If you ever go hiking near moraine lakes, stay on the marked trails. Do not follow cairns that look too old. Do not trust paths that are not on your map. And if you hear footsteps behind you when nobody is there, do not turn around. Just walk faster, just get back to somewhere with other people, with witnesses, with light. Because there are things in those mountains that do not want to be seen. And my brother made the mistake of seeing them anyway. I have worked in bureaucracy for most of my adult life, and I can tell you that the most terrifying things are not the dramatic ones. They are not the crimes that make headlines or the cases that get turned into documentaries. The most terrifying things are the small inconsistencies, the files that do not add up, the pieces of evidence that exist when they should not. I learned this in the winter of 2023 when I was working as an inventory clerk at the Edmonton Police Service Evidence Storage Facility. It was not glamorous work. Mostly I spent my days in a climate-controlled warehouse scanning barcodes and making sure that boxes were shelved in the right locations. Cold cases, old cases, cases that had been solved decades ago but whose evidence had to be kept for legal reasons. Thousands upon thousands of boxes, each one containing some fragment of someone's worst day. My supervisor's name was Harris, and he had been working in evidence storage for almost 30 years. He told me once that he had seen everything, that nothing surprised him anymore. He said the job was simple as long as you followed the system. Every piece of evidence had a case number. Every case number had a file. Every file told you exactly what should be in the box and where it should be shelved. The system was perfect as long as everyone followed it. But people make mistakes. They mislabel boxes, they put things back in the wrong place, and that is how things get lost. In January, I was assigned to do an audit of Section C, which housed evidence from cases dating back to the 1980s. Most of it was drug-related offenses, some assaults, a few unsolved burglaries, nothing particularly interesting. I was on my third week of the audit when I found a box that was labeled incorrectly. The case number on the label was 874429, but when I looked it up in the database, that case was supposed to contain clothing from a convenience store robbery. The box I was holding felt too light to contain clothing. I opened it. Inside was a single VHS tape in a clear plastic evidence bag. There was a label on the tape written in faded blue ink. It said Griffin Confession, December 12th, 1987. Nothing else, no other context. I checked the database again. Case 874429 made no mention of any videotape. I checked the physical file. Nothing about a confession. Nothing about anyone named Griffin. I brought it to Harris and showed him. He frowned at the tape for a long moment and then told me to log it as a mislabeled item and he would look into it. I asked him if we should watch it first to see what case it actually belonged to. He said no. He said we were not investigators, we were inventory clerks, and it was not our job to view evidence. But I was curious. I have always been curious about things that do not fit, things that are out of place. So that night after my shift ended, I asked Harris if I could stay late to finish the section I was working on. He said fine as long as I locked up properly. When I left, I waited until I heard his car pull out of the parking lot. Then I went back to the box with the tape. We had an old VCR in the break room that someone had kept around for converting old evidence tapes to digital format. I took the tape out of the evidence bag, hands shaking a little, and slid it into the machine. The video quality was poor, grainy, and washed out the way old VHS tapes always are. The timestamp in the corner said December 12th, 1987, 3:47 p.m. The camera was stationary, pointing at a metal folding chair in what looked like a barn or a shed. Concrete floor, wooden walls, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. After about 30 seconds, a man walked into frame and sat down in the chair. He was maybe 40 years old, thin, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. His hair was dark and greasy, combed straight back from his forehead. He looked directly into the camera and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. He said, "My name is Adam Griffin, and I am making this confession of my own free will. Nobody is forcing me to do this. I want people to know what I did." His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. He folded his hands in his lap and continued. "On October 3rd, 1987, I murdered a woman named Zoe Harper. She was 26 years old. I picked her up outside a bar in Leduc at approximately 11:30 at night. She thought I was giving her a ride home. I drove her to a barn on my property located at Rural Route 2, Range Road 241, about 15 kilometers south of Leduc. I strangled her with a length of rope. It took approximately 4 minutes for her to stop breathing. After she was dead, I buried her body in the northwest corner of the property, approximately 60 meters from the barn. I buried her 3 feet deep. I marked the location with a pile of stones. He stopped talking and just sat there staring at the camera for almost a full minute. Then he said, "I want her family to know where she is. I want them to be able to bury her properly. This is my confession, and it is the truth." He stood up and walked out of frame. The tape continued to record the empty chair for another 2 minutes before it cut to static. I sat in the break room staring at the television screen, feeling sick to my stomach. I rewound the tape and watched it again. The details were so specific: the date, the location, the description of the burial site. This was clearly a real confession, but why was it mislabeled? Why was it not in the correct case file? I went back to my computer and searched the database for any case involving a Zoe Harper in 1987. Nothing. I searched for Adam Griffin. Nothing. I expanded my search to include all cases in Leduc in 1987. There were dozens, but none of them matched. I called Harris even though it was almost 10 at night. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed. I told him what I had found, what was on the tape, that we needed to contact the police immediately because there was a body buried on a property south of Leduc. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me if I had watched the tape. I said yes. He said, "Dylan, I specifically told you not to view evidence." I said, "I know, but this is important. There is a woman who has been missing since 1987, and we know where she is buried." He sighed and said he would come back to the facility and we would deal with it together. Harris arrived 20 minutes later. I showed him the tape. He watched it in complete silence, his face expressionless. When it finished, he said, "We need to call this in to the cold case unit." He made the call right there from the break room. Within an hour, 2 detectives arrived. I showed them the tape. I showed them the mislabeled box. I gave them everything I had found. They took the tape and told us they would investigate. 3 days later, one of the detectives called me. He said they had gone to the location Griffin had specified in the confession, Rural Route 2, Range Road 241 south of Leduc. They had excavated the northwest corner of the property exactly where Griffin said the body would be. They had dug down 4 feet using ground-penetrating radar to guide them. They found nothing, no body, no bones, no evidence that the ground had ever been disturbed. I asked him if they had the right location. He said they had triple-checked the coordinates. The property existed exactly where Griffin said it did. There just was not anything buried there. I asked about Zoe Harper. He said they had searched every missing persons database going back to 1980. There was no record of any Zoe Harper reported missing in 1987 or any other year. No murder matching that description. No unsolved case involving a woman strangled and buried south of Leduc. I told him that did not make sense, that the confession was too detailed to be fake. He agreed. He said it was very strange. Then he asked me if I had any information about Adam Griffin, the man in the video. I said no, just what was on the tape. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We ran the name through our system. We found an Adam Griffin who lived in the Leduc area, but he died in a car accident in June of 1985, 2.5 years before the date on that videotape." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I said there must be a mistake. Maybe it was a different Adam Griffin. The detective said they had checked. There was only one Adam Griffin in the Leduc area in the 1980s. And he had definitely died in 1985. They had pulled the death certificate. They had even tracked down the accident report, single vehicle collision on Highway 2. Griffin had been driving drunk and hit a concrete barrier at high speed. He was pronounced dead at the scene. I asked how that was possible. How could a dead man make a confession tape 2 years after he died? The detective said he did not know. He said they were going to send the tape to a lab to check if it had been doctored or edited in some way. I asked him to keep me updated. He said he would. 2 weeks later, I came into work and went to retrieve the box with the tape because the detectives had said they were sending it back after analysis. The box was there in Section C exactly where I had left it, but when I opened it, the evidence bag was empty. The tape was gone. I checked the log. Nobody had signed it out. I asked Harris if he had moved it. He said no. I called the detective. He said they had returned the tape 4 days ago, that it should definitely be in the evidence locker. I told him it was not. He came back to the facility that afternoon with his partner. We searched Section C top to bottom. We checked every box, every shelf. The tape was nowhere. It had simply disappeared. The detective asked me if I had made any copies. I said no. He asked if I was absolutely certain about what I had seen on the tape, the name, the date, the confession. I said yes. I was certain. I had watched it 3 times. He wrote everything down in his notebook, but I could tell he did not believe me anymore. That was 8 months ago. I still work at the evidence facility. I still do inventory on cold cases. But now sometimes late at night when I am alone in the warehouse, I think about Adam Griffin sitting in that chair, confessing to a murder that apparently never happened, 2 years after he died. I think about Zoe Harper, who does not exist in any database, who was never reported missing, who is not buried where Griffin said she was. And sometimes I have dreams about the barn in the video. In the dreams, I am the one sitting in the chair and the camera is recording me. I open my mouth to speak, but it is not my voice that comes out. It is Griffin's voice. And I am confessing to things I have never done, to crimes that never happened, in places that do not exist. I wake up with my throat sore like I have been talking for hours. Last week I found dirt under my fingernails even though I had not been outside. The dirt was dark and smelled like decay. I washed my hands 3 times, but I could still smell it. I think something followed me back from that tape. I think by watching it, I opened a door that was supposed to stay closed, and now I cannot close it again. My name is Audrey, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. When you are a child, you do not know what normal is. You only know what you are taught. You only know the world that the adults around you create. So when I was growing up in the Helping Hands commune outside of Lethbridge in the 1990s, I did not know that what was happening to me was wrong. I thought it was normal. I thought it was what God wanted. I thought I was being saved. The commune was established in 1989 by a man who called himself Patrick, though I learned much later that was not his real name. He had bought a large property about 40 minutes outside of Lethbridge, acres and acres of flat prairie land with a main house, several outbuildings, and a large barn that he converted into a chapel. He called the place Helping Hands because he said that was what we were. The hands of God helping to build a new world. He preached that the outside world was corrupt and sinful, that cities were filled with demons, that the only way to be pure was to separate ourselves completely and live according to his teachings. And people believed him. Families believed him. My parents joined the commune when I was 7 years old in 1994. They had been struggling financially. My father had lost his job and my mother was working 2 shifts at a grocery store, and we were about to lose our house. Then they met Patrick at a church event in Lethbridge. He told them that material wealth did not matter, that God would provide for those who were faithful, that they could come live at Helping Hands and be part of a community that took care of its own. My parents were desperate. They sold everything we had and moved us to the commune. There were about 30 people living there when we arrived. Families with children, single adults, elderly people who had given their life savings to Patrick. Everyone lived in the main house or in small cabins scattered around the property. The men worked the land, growing vegetables and raising chickens. The women cooked and cleaned and took care of the children. And Patrick led us all in prayer 3 times a day, every day, without exception. At first it seemed nice. There was always food. There were other children to play with. My parents seemed happier than they had been in a long time. But then the rules started. We were not allowed to leave the property without permission. We were not allowed to speak to anyone from outside. We were not allowed to watch television or listen to the radio because Patrick said it would pollute our minds. We had to ask permission to do almost anything, and if we broke the rules, there were consequences. Patrick called them purification rituals. He said that sin lived inside us like a poison and that we needed to be cleansed in order to be worthy of God's love. For adults, this meant fasting for days at a time or spending hours kneeling on concrete floors praying for forgiveness. For children, it was worse. He said children were especially vulnerable to sin because we had not learned to control our impulses. He said we needed to be taught discipline. When I was 8 years old, I was caught playing with a toy that I had hidden from before we moved to the commune, a small stuffed rabbit that I had had since I was a baby. Toys were not allowed at Helping Hands. Patrick said they were distractions from God. When he found me with the rabbit, he took it away and told me I needed to be purified. He brought me to the barn, to a room in the back that he called the prayer chamber. Inside was a wooden box, about the size of a coffin but shorter. It had air holes drilled in the sides. He told me to get inside. He said I needed to spend time alone with God to think about what I had done wrong. I was in that box for 6 hours. It was completely dark. I could not move. I could barely breathe. I screamed and cried and begged to be let out, but nobody came. When Patrick finally opened the box, he asked me if I understood why I had been punished. I said yes. I said I was sorry. I said I would never disobey again. He smiled and told me I was a good girl and that God was proud of me. That was the first time, but it was not the last. Over the next 6 years, I was put in the prayer box dozens of times for talking back, for not finishing my chores, for questioning Patrick's teachings, for crying when I was supposed to be praying. Other children were punished the same way. Some were put in the box for days at a time. We learned not to cry. We learned not to complain. We learned that resistance only made things worse. But the prayer boxes were not the worst part. The worst part was the confessions. Every Sunday night, Patrick would gather all the children in the chapel and make us confess our sins in front of everyone. He said that sin could not be hidden, that it needed to be brought into the light in order to be destroyed. He would go around the room and point at each child and demand that we confess. And if we said we had not sinned, he would tell us we were lying. He would tell us that everyone sins, that the only sin worse than sinning was refusing to admit it. So we learned to make things up. We learned to confess to things we had not done just to satisfy him. I confessed to stealing food I had not stolen. I confessed to having impure thoughts I had not had. I confessed to hating my parents even though I loved them. And after each confession, Patrick would make us kneel and he would place his hands on our heads and pray for our souls. His hands always felt too heavy, like he was pressing down on us, trying to push us into the ground. When I was 14 years old, a social worker named Penelope came to the commune. Someone had called in a complaint, I never found out who. She interviewed several of the children, including me. She asked if we were happy. She asked if we felt safe. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to tell her about the prayer boxes and the confessions and the way Patrick looked at us like we were broken things that needed to be fixed. But I was terrified. Patrick had told us that if we ever spoke to outsiders about what happened at Helping Hands, God would punish us. He said we would be damned to hell. He said our families would be damned too. So when Penelope asked me if everything was okay, I looked her in the eyes and I lied. I said yes. I said I was happy. I said I loved living there. But Penelope did not believe me. She must have seen something in my face or heard something in my voice, because 2 weeks later she came back with police officers and a court order. They removed 12 children from the commune, including me. They took us to foster homes. They told us we were safe now. They told us we did not have to go back. My parents stayed. They believed in Patrick even after everything that had happened. They believed he was innocent, that the government was persecuting him for his faith. They cut off all contact with me. I have not spoken to them in over 20 years. Patrick was never charged with anything. The investigation went on for months, but there was not enough evidence. The children who testified, including myself, were too scared to give details. We had been trained so well to keep secrets that we could not break the habit even when we were free. And the adults at the commune all defended Patrick. They said he was a good man. They said he had saved them. They said the children were lying. In 2003, the commune disbanded. The property was abandoned. Patrick disappeared. Some people say he moved to British Columbia and started a new group under a different name. Others say he died. Nobody knows for sure. I went back to the property once when I was 25 years old. I do not know why I did it. Maybe I needed to see it again to prove to myself that it had been real. The buildings were falling apart, windows broken, roofs caving in. The barn where I had spent so many hours in that box was still standing, but barely. I went inside. The prayer chamber was still there in the back, and on the floor, carved into the wooden boards, were symbols. Circles and triangles and strange letters that I did not recognize. They had not been there when I was a child. Or maybe they had and I had just never noticed. Behind the barn I found something else, a section of ground that looked disturbed, like it had been dug up and filled in again. There were 12 mounds, each one marked with a small pile of stones. 12 mounds. 12 children. I called the police. They came out and excavated the site. They found remains. Small bones. The coroner said the children had died over a period of several years in the 1990s. The cause of death in most cases was determined to be malnutrition and dehydration. In other words, they had been starved. The deaths had all been reported at the time as natural causes: pneumonia, heart defects, illness. Nobody had questioned it. Nobody had investigated. The children had been buried on the property without autopsies, without proper funerals, without anyone outside the commune even knowing they had died. Patrick was never found. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but he had vanished. In 2018, there was a reported sighting of him in a small town near Prince George, but by the time police arrived, he was gone again. He is still out there somewhere. He is 70 years old now, if he is still alive. And I think about him sometimes. I think about whether he believes he was right, whether he thinks he was doing God's work, whether he remembers the children he killed, or if he has convinced himself that they died because they were not faithful enough. I still have nightmares about the prayer box. I wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I cannot breathe, like I am trapped in a small dark space with no way out. My therapist says it is post-traumatic stress. She says it will get better with time. But it has been 25 years and I still cannot sleep in complete darkness. I still cannot handle small spaces. I still flinch when someone touches the top of my head. There were supposed to be investigations. There were supposed to be charges filed against the adults who enabled Patrick, who knew what was happening and did nothing. But nothing ever came of it. The system failed us. The church failed us. Our own parents failed us. And Patrick got away with everything. If you ever hear about a religious group that isolates itself from society, that demands complete obedience to a single leader, that punishes children for normal childhood behavior, please report it. Please do not ignore it. Please do not assume that someone else will handle it. Because I am telling you from experience that nobody handles it. Nobody saves those children unless someone speaks up. And by the time someone finally does, it is usually too late. My name is Vivian, and I am a journalist, or at least I used to be before I stopped being able to separate my work from my grief. I spent 5 years researching missing and murdered Indigenous women across Western Canada, collecting data, interviewing families, trying to find patterns in cases that police had written off as runaways or accidents or women who simply chose to disappear. I thought I was doing important work. I thought I was giving voice to the voiceless. But I never expected to find my own cousin's name in the files I was building. I never expected the story to become personal. Her name was Evelyn. She was my mother's brother's daughter, 3 years younger than me, and she had the kind of laugh that made everyone around her start laughing too, even if they did not know what was funny. She grew up on the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation but moved to Grande Prairie when she was 19 to find work. She wanted to save money to go to college. She wanted to study to become a teacher. She was working at a restaurant and living in a small apartment with 2 other girls, and she would call my mother every Sunday to tell her about her week. She was doing everything right. She was being careful. She was building a future. In July of 2017, Evelyn's roommate called my aunt to say that Evelyn had not come home from her shift at the restaurant 3 days earlier. She had last been seen leaving work around 11 at night. She told her co-workers she was going to walk to the gas station a few blocks away to buy cigarettes, and then she was going to try to catch a ride home because it was late and she did not want to wait for the bus. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. My aunt reported her missing immediately. The Grande Prairie RCMP took the report, but I could tell from the way my aunt described the interaction that they were not taking it seriously. They asked if Evelyn had a boyfriend. They asked if she used drugs. They asked if she had any reason to run away. My aunt told them, no, Evelyn was not like that. Something was wrong. Please, you have to find her. But I know how these cases go. I had been researching them for 3 years by that point. I knew that when an Indigenous woman goes missing, the response is always slower, the resources are always fewer, the assumptions are always worse. I drove up to Grande Prairie the next day. I started asking questions. I talked to Evelyn's co-workers, her roommates, people who hung around the gas station where she was last seen. And that is when I started to notice something. Evelyn was not the first woman to disappear from that area. In fact, she was the 8th in just over 2 years. 8 women, all Indigenous, all between the ages of 19 and 32, all last seen along Highway 43 between Grande Prairie and Whitecourt. 8 women and nobody was talking about it. There were no news stories. There was no task force. There were just 8 separate missing persons cases that nobody had bothered to connect. I started building a timeline. The first woman disappeared in March of 2015. Her name was Jolene and she was 23 years old. She had been hitchhiking from Grande Prairie to her reserve near Slave Lake. Her family reported her missing when she did not arrive. The RCMP searched the highway but found nothing. 6 months later, another woman vanished, then another, then another. All of them were hitchhiking or walking along Highway 43. All of them simply disappeared without a trace. Until October of 2017, when a hunter found the first body in a section of dense forest about 5 kilometers off the highway near the town of Valley View. The remains were skeletal, partially scattered by animals. The forensic team identified her as one of the missing women from 2016. Then over the next 3 months, they found 5 more bodies in the same general area, all within a few kilometers of each other. All of them had been there for months or years. All of them had been positioned the same way, lying on their backs with their hands folded across their chests and their bodies facing east toward the rising sun. Evelyn was the 6th body they found. I was there when they brought her out of the woods. I watched them carry the black body bag through the trees and load it into the coroner's van. My aunt collapsed. My uncle had to hold her up. I just stood there feeling like I was watching it happen to someone else. Like I was reporting on someone else's tragedy, like this was just another case for my research. But it was not. It was Evelyn. It was my cousin who used to braid my hair when we were kids. It was the girl who wanted to be a teacher. The RCMP finally admitted they were dealing with a serial killer. They formed a task force. They started reviewing traffic camera footage from the highway. And in January of 2018, they arrested a long-haul trucker named Ellis who had been driving the Grande Prairie to Edmonton route for the past 7 years. They found journals in his truck, dozens of notebooks filled with his handwriting, detailing every woman he had picked up, every conversation he had had with them, every moment of their deaths. He called them his collection. He called them angels. He said he was gathering them, that he had been chosen by God to identify the pure souls and release them from their suffering so they could ascend. He had a system. He would pick up women who were hitchhiking along Highway 43, usually late at night when there were no other vehicles around. He would talk to them for a while, asking them questions about their lives, their families, their beliefs. He called this his spiritual purity test. If they passed, if they answered his questions in a way that satisfied whatever twisted criteria he had developed, he would pull off onto one of the logging roads that branch off from the highway. He would walk them into the forest. He would strangle them with his hands. And then he would position their bodies facing east, and he would pray over them for hours, sometimes until dawn, asking God to accept his offering. Ellis was convicted of 6 murders in 2019, 6 out of 8. Because they never found the other 2 bodies, they searched for months. They brought in cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. They had Ellis in an interrogation room for days trying to get him to tell them where he had left the other 2 women. He said he could not remember. He said there had been so many that the faces blurred together that he only wrote down the ones who had been truly pure. The other 2, he said, must not have passed his test. He must have left them somewhere else, somewhere he considered less sacred. Or maybe he was lying. Maybe he was keeping that information as his last bit of control, his last way to hurt the families who were desperately searching for their daughters. Ellis died in prison in 2022. He was attacked by another inmate who had heard about his crimes, about his so-called collection of angels. He was beaten so badly that he never regained consciousness. He died without ever telling anyone where those last 2 women were buried. And one of those women is still my cousin Evelyn's friend, a girl named Sarah who had disappeared 2 weeks before Evelyn did. Sarah's mother still calls me sometimes asking if I have heard anything, if there have been any new searches, if anyone is still looking. I have to tell her no. I have to tell her that the case is closed, that Ellis is dead, that without his confession there is no way to know where Sarah is. But I also tell her I have not stopped looking. I tell her I drive that highway every few months and I walk into those forests and I search. Because this is what they do not tell you about being a journalist covering these kinds of cases. They do not tell you that you will start to carry the weight of every missing woman like she is your own sister. They do not tell you that you will memorize their faces, their names, their last known locations. They do not tell you that you will dream about them, that you will see them in crowds and your heart will stop for just a moment before you realize it is not them. It could never be them because they are gone. I have Evelyn's photograph on my desk. It is the one from her high school graduation, the one where she is wearing a blue dress and smiling with her whole face. I look at it every day, and I think about the fact that Highway 43 is not officially part of the Highway of Tears, even though the pattern is exactly the same. The Highway of Tears is Highway 16 in British Columbia, where dozens of Indigenous women have disappeared over the past 50 years. Everyone knows about Highway 16. There are documentaries about it. There are memorials along the road. But Highway 43 in Alberta, the highway where my cousin died, where 8 women that we know of were murdered, that highway is not famous. That highway does not have a name. Those women are not part of the national conversation. I tried to change that. I wrote articles, I pitched stories to editors at major newspapers, I contacted documentary filmmakers. Most of them said the same thing. They said the Highway of Tears story had already been told. They said readers were suffering from true crime fatigue. They said there was not enough of a hook. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them that 8 dead women was enough of a hook. I wanted to tell them that just because one highway became famous does not mean we should ignore all the others. But I did not scream. I just kept researching, I just kept collecting data, I just kept trying to find patterns that might prevent the next disappearance. And I found something. I found that between 2010 and 2020, there were at least 43 Indigenous women who disappeared or were murdered along highways in Alberta alone. 43 women. Most of their cases are still unsolved. Most of them received minimal media coverage. Most of them were written off as women who made bad choices, who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, who should have known better than to hitchhike or walk alone at night. Nobody asked why these women were hitchhiking in the first place. Nobody asked why there is no public transportation in rural areas. Nobody asked why these women felt they had no other choice. I stopped working as a journalist last year. I could not do it anymore. I could not keep writing about dead women and watching nothing change. I could not keep interviewing grieving mothers and then watching the cases go cold. I could not keep attending vigils and marches and rallies where we all said never again and then it happened again anyway. I was drowning in grief and rage and helplessness, and I needed to step back before I lost myself completely. But I still search for Sarah. I still drive Highway 43 every few months. I still walk into those forests hoping that maybe this time I will find something the search teams missed. I owe that to Evelyn. I owe that to Sarah's mother, who still calls me with hope in her voice even though 3 years have passed. I owe that to every woman whose name I have in my files, every woman who disappeared and became just a statistic. Ellis is dead, but the highway is still there. The forests are still there. And somewhere in those trees are the remains of 2 women who deserve to be found. 2 women who deserve to go home. 2 women whose families deserve to bury them properly and say goodbye. I do not know if I will ever find them. I do not know if anyone will, but I have to keep trying. Because if I stop, if I give up, then Ellis wins. Then those women are forgotten, then their deaths meant nothing. And I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to let Evelyn's death be just another case in just another file in just another journalist's research. She was real, she was loved, she had a future. And she deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim, more than just a body in the woods, more than just one of 8. She deserves to be remembered as Evelyn, as my cousin, as the girl with the contagious laugh who wanted to be a teacher. That is the story I will keep telling. That is the story that matters. My name is Nathan, and I host a true crime podcast called Forgotten Alberta, where I investigate local mysteries and cold cases that have been largely ignored by mainstream media. I started it 3 years ago because I grew up listening to my grandfather tell stories about strange things that happened in rural Alberta. Things that nobody ever talked about. Things that got swept under the rug because small towns do not like bad publicity. I thought if I could shine a light on some of these cases, maybe I could help bring closure to families who had been waiting decades for answers. I thought I was doing something good. I thought I was being respectful. I had no idea that some stories do not want to be told. In September of 2022, I started researching a case that had fascinated me since I was a teenager. In 1974, a family of 4 was murdered in their farmhouse about 30 kilometers outside of Brooks, Alberta. The victims were a husband and wife in their 30s and their 2 children, a boy aged 9 and a girl aged 6. They were found by a neighbor who had noticed that their cattle had not been fed for several days. The scene was brutal. All 4 family members had been stabbed multiple times. There were signs of a struggle. The house had been ransacked like someone was looking for something. But nothing of value appeared to be missing. No money, no jewelry, nothing. The RCMP investigated for months but never identified a suspect. There were no witnesses. The farmhouse was isolated, the nearest neighbor almost 2 kilometers away. The family kept to themselves. They did not have any known enemies. The case went cold within a year, and it has remained unsolved for almost 50 years. The farmhouse itself was abandoned shortly after the murders. Nobody wanted to buy a property where an entire family had been killed. Over the decades, it fell into disrepair, the roof collapsing, the windows breaking, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had left behind. I decided to do a 2-part episode on the case. The first part would cover the known facts, the investigation, the theories about what might have happened. The second part would be more experimental. I wanted to visit the farmhouse myself and record ambient sound to use in the episode, to give listeners a sense of what the place felt like now. To create atmosphere. I know some people think that is disrespectful, that I was exploiting a tragedy for entertainment, but I genuinely believed I was honoring the victims by keeping their story alive. I drove out to the farmhouse on a gray afternoon in late September. The property was easy to find. The driveway was still visible even though it was overgrown with weeds. The house itself was worse than I expected. The entire second floor had caved in. The porch was rotting, the front door was missing. It looked like the kind of place teenagers would dare each other to explore on Halloween. I felt a little uneasy standing there, but I told myself that was natural. It was the power of suggestion. I knew what had happened here, so of course I felt creeped out. I set up my equipment in what used to be the living room. I had a good quality digital recorder, the kind that picks up frequencies humans cannot hear. I set it on a broken table near the fireplace and I let it record for 3 hours while I walked around the property, taking photographs and making notes. The sun was setting by the time I came back inside to collect my equipment. The light coming through the broken windows was orange and weak. The shadows were long. I remember thinking that the place felt heavier than when I had arrived, like the air itself had gotten thicker. But again, I told myself I was just psyching myself out. I drove home, and that night I transferred the audio file to my computer to start editing. I put on my headphones and started listening. For the first hour, there was nothing interesting, just whine through broken windows, creaking wood, the occasional sound of something small moving around, probably mice or rats. Then around the 1 hour and 20-minute mark, I heard something that made me pause the playback and rewind. It sounded like voices. Very faint, almost inaudible, but definitely voices. Human voices. I isolated the audio and amplified it. 2 voices, both male, having a conversation. I could not make out most of what they were saying, but I caught fragments. One voice said something that sounded like deeper than we thought. The other voice responded with something I could not understand. Then the first voice again, clearer this time. The baby is still down there. We should have checked. I felt ice in my stomach. I had been alone at that farmhouse, completely alone. I had walked the entire property. There was nobody else there. And yet my recorder had picked up two men having a conversation about something being down there, about a baby. I checked the timestamp. The voices occurred at exactly 2:47 p.m., which would have been when I was outside taking photographs of the barn. The recorder had been sitting alone in the living room. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the recorder had picked up a radio signal or interference from a nearby CB radio. Maybe someone had been on the property without me noticing and I had just not seen them. But the farmhouse was so isolated. The nearest road was a kilometer away. I would have heard a vehicle approaching, and the voices sounded close, like the men were standing right next to the recorder. I kept listening. For the next hour, there was nothing but ambient sound again. Then at the 2-hour and 33-minute mark, I heard something that made me rip the headphones off my head. My own voice, clear as day. My voice saying, "I am already down here, Nathan. I have been waiting." I was not in the house at that time. I was outside. I had not spoken those words. I had not said anything remotely like that. But it was definitely my voice. I know my own voice. I have been recording myself for 3 years. That was me speaking. I did not sleep that night. I kept replaying the audio over and over, trying to find some rational explanation. Voice editing software. But I had the raw file directly from the recorder. It had not been altered. A prank? But nobody knew I was going to that farmhouse. I had not told anyone where I was going. I always research alone because it is easier to focus without distractions. The next morning, I called the Brooks RCMP detachment and asked to speak to someone about the 1974 murders. I was transferred to a detective named Corporal Singh, who told me the case was still technically open even though there had been no activity on it in decades. I explained who I was and what I was doing. Then I told him about the recording, about the voices mentioning a baby being down there. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me to send him the audio file. I sent it within the hour. He called me back that afternoon. He said the recording was disturbing and that he wanted to send someone out to the farmhouse to investigate. I asked him what he meant by investigate. He said that according to the original case file from 1974, the murdered family had not had a baby. There were 2 children, the 9-year-old boy and the 6-year-old girl. But the detective at the time had noted something strange in his report. The wife had been pregnant, about 7 months along. The coroner had confirmed it during the autopsy, but there had been no baby found at the scene. I felt sick. I asked him what he meant by no baby found. He said that typically when a pregnant woman is murdered, the fetus is accounted for in the autopsy report. But in this case, the coroner had noted that the woman's abdomen had been cut open post-mortem and the fetus had been removed. The original investigators had assumed the killer had taken it, that it was some kind of sick trophy. But they had never found any evidence of what happened to it. The case file mentioned that they had searched the property, including the well behind the house, but they had found nothing. Corporal Singh told me he was going to get authorization to excavate the well. I asked if I could be there. He said no, this was an active investigation now, but he would keep me informed. 3 days later, he called me again. They had drained the well and searched it with specialized equipment. At the bottom, buried in decades of mud and debris, they found remains. Small bones. The forensic team confirmed they were the bones of a human infant, approximately 7 months gestation. The bones had been there since 1974. The case was reopened. The discovery was briefly mentioned in the local news. But there were no new leads. Whoever killed that family and removed the unborn baby and threw it down the well had gotten away with it almost 50 years ago. They were probably dead by now. The case would likely never be solved. But at least the family could finally be buried together. At least that small child who never got a chance to be born could be laid to rest with their mother and siblings. I should have been satisfied with that. I should have felt like I had done something good, like I had helped bring a tiny piece of closure to a terrible tragedy. But I could not stop thinking about that other voice on the recording, my voice, saying I was already down there. 2 weeks after they found the baby's remains, I decided to go back to the farmhouse one more time. I do not know why. Maybe I wanted to record a follow-up episode. Maybe I wanted to see if I could capture any more unexplained audio. Maybe I was just stupid and curious and too invested in the story to let it go. I brought the same equipment. I set up the recorder in the same spot, but this time I stayed in the house. I sat on the floor and I watched the recorder while it was running. I wanted to make absolutely certain that nobody else was there. I wanted proof that I was alone. I recorded for 2 hours. Nothing happened. No voices, no strange sounds. Just me sitting in a ruined farmhouse feeling like an idiot. I was about to pack up my equipment when I noticed something I had not seen during my first visit. In the floor near the fireplace, there was a section of boards that looked newer than the rest, like they had been replaced at some point. The wood was a slightly different color. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the edge. The boards were loose. I should not have pulled them up. I should have called Corporal Singh and let the police handle it. But I did not. I pulled up 3 boards and looked down into the space beneath. It was dark. I turned on my phone flashlight and pointed it into the hole. There was a crawl space under the house, maybe 2 feet deep. And there was something down there. Something wrapped in rotting fabric. I reached down and touched it. The fabric fell apart in my hands. Underneath was a book, a journal. The pages were yellowed and water damaged, but still readable. I pulled it out and opened it to the first page. At the top, in careful handwriting, it said, "Property of Nathan Brooks." My name. My full name. But that was impossible. This journal had been under the floorboards for decades. The wood covering it was old, weathered. This journal had been here since long before I was born, and yet my name was written on the first page in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. I flipped through the pages. They were filled with entries, diary-style entries, describing the farmhouse, describing the family who lived there, describing plans to kill them. The last entry was dated October 1st, 1974, 2 days before the murders. It said, "Tomorrow I will finish what I started. The baby cannot be allowed to live. The baby knows what I am." I dropped the journal. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I grabbed my recorder and my phone and I ran out of that house, and I did not stop running until I reached my car. I drove straight to the RCMP detachment. I gave them the journal. I told them where I found it. Corporal Singh looked at me like I was insane. He said they would analyze it, run it for prints and DNA, try to determine how old it really was. They called me a week later. The journal was real. The paper was consistent with the 1970s. The ink was old. But there were no fingerprints on it except mine, and they could not explain why my name was written inside. Singh asked me if this was some kind of elaborate hoax, if I had planted the journal myself to create content for my podcast. I told him no. I told him I had no explanation. I told him I was just as confused and terrified as he was. I have not been back to that farmhouse. I have not recorded another episode of my podcast. I deleted the audio files from the farmhouse from my computer, but I still remember what they sounded like. I still remember my own voice saying I was already down there. Sometimes I have dreams where I am standing in that farmhouse in 1974 and there is a family sleeping upstairs and I am holding a knife and I know what I am about to do. I wake up sweating and gasping and I check my hands to make sure there is no blood. There never is. But the dreams keep coming, and I keep wondering if somehow in some way I cannot understand I was there. If some version of me was there. If time is not as linear as we think it is and I have already done something that I have not done yet. I do not know. I do not have answers. I just know that some stories should stay buried, some cold cases should stay cold, and some farmhouses should be left alone. My name is Zoe and I am a journalist, or I was a journalist until I covered a story that made me question everything I thought I understood about belief and manipulation, and how quickly devotion can turn into something deadly. In the spring of 2012, I was working for a regional newspaper based in Edmonton, and I got a tip from a source about a group living in a compound near Cold Lake. The source, who worked at a hardware store in town, told me that members of this group had been coming in every few weeks buying supplies. Large quantities of non-perishable food, water purification tablets, batteries, propane tanks. They paid in cash. They did not talk much. But they kept mentioning a date. November 21st, 2012. They kept saying they had to be ready by November 24, and I did some digging. The group called themselves the Ascension Fellowship, and they were led by a man who went by the name of Brother Oscar. I could not find much about him online, just a few old forum posts on doomsday prepper websites where he talked about receiving visions from God about the end of civilization. He believed that on November 21st, 2012, there would be a global catastrophe that would wipe out most of humanity. He said only those who were spiritually pure would survive to build a new world. He had convinced about 40 people to sell everything they owned, leave their families and join him at a property he had purchased near Cold Lake. They had been there for almost a year by the time I heard about them. I convinced my editor to let me investigate. I said it could be a big story, that this was exactly the kind of thing people were interested in with all the 2012 doomsday predictions that were popular at the time. He gave me a week to see what I could find. I started by trying to contact the group directly. I sent letters to the property address. I called the phone number listed on their rudimentary website. Nobody responded. So I decided to drive up to Cold Lake and try to approach them in person. The compound was about 15 kilometers outside of town on a remote piece of land surrounded by forest. There was a gate at the entrance with a sign that said, "Private Property Ascension Fellowship, no trespassing." The gate was locked. I parked my car and walked up to it. There was an intercom system attached to the gate post. I pressed the button. After a long moment, a woman's voice answered. I explained that I was a journalist and that I wanted to write a story about their community. The voice said, "No media, no outsiders, please leave." I tried to explain that I just wanted to understand their beliefs, that I would be respectful. The voice repeated, "Please leave," and then the intercom went silent. I stood there for a while taking photographs of the gate and the fence and the trees beyond. I could see buildings in the distance, maybe 3 or 4 structures. Then I heard a vehicle approaching from inside the compound. A pickup truck pulled up to the gate and a man got out. He was in his 50s, thin with long gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. He looked tired. He looked afraid. He walked up to the gate and asked me what I wanted. I repeated my introduction. I said I wanted to tell their story. He looked back over his shoulder toward the buildings, and then he said quietly, "We are not supposed to talk to people from outside. Brother Oscar says outsiders are corrupted. But I need you to know something. My daughter is in there. Her name is Claire. She is 19 years old. I came here because she joined this group and I could not let her be here alone. But I made a mistake. This is not what I thought it was. Oscar is not a prophet. He is sick, and I think he is planning something terrible for November 21st. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. The man who told me his name was Dylan explained that as the date got closer, Brother Oscar's behavior had become increasingly erratic. He talked about spirits and visions. He said that God had told him the ascension would not happen on its own, that the faithful would have to help it along. Dylan said Oscar had started preparing what he called an ascension ceremony for November 21st. He had been collecting medications, sleeping pills, and sedatives mostly. He had been talking about how the physical body was a prison and that they needed to shed their bodies in order to ascend to the spiritual realm. Dylan realized Oscar was talking about mass suicide. I asked Dylan why he did not just leave, why he did not take his daughter and go to the police. He said Claire would not listen to him anymore. She believed completely in Oscar's teachings. She said her father was weak, that he did not have enough faith, and Oscar had confiscated everyone's identification documents and car keys when they joined the fellowship. He said it was to prevent them from being tempted to return to the corrupted world. Dylan said he had been trying to figure out a way to get his daughter out, but she refused to go. And there were others, younger people mostly, who were completely devoted to Oscar. They would do anything he asked. I told Dylan I was going to call the police immediately. He grabbed my arm through the gate and said, "No, please, not yet." He said if the police showed up, Oscar would accelerate his plans. He said Oscar had told the group that persecution from outsiders would be a sign that it was time to ascend. Dylan begged me to give him one more week to try to convince Claire to leave. He said if he could not get her out by November 20th, then I should call the authorities. I did not want to wait. Everything in me said this was an emergency, that people were in danger. But I also understood that this was his daughter. So I agreed to wait. I gave him my phone number. I told him to call me if anything changed. I spent the next week doing research on Brother Oscar. His real name was Oscar Beaumont, and he had a history of involvement with fringe religious groups going back to the 1980s. He had been kicked out of at least 2 churches for what the pastors described as disturbing and apocalyptic teachings. In 2009, he had been arrested for fraud after convincing several elderly people to give him their life savings to fund a previous doomsday group that had predicted the end of the world in 2010. When nothing happened, he had simply moved on to a new date, new predictions, new followers. On November 19th, 2 days before the predicted ascension date, Dylan called me. He was whispering. He said Oscar had moved up the ceremony to November 20th, the next day. He said Oscar had told everyone to prepare, that the time had come. Dylan said he had tried one last time to convince Claire to leave, and she had reported him to Oscar for spreading doubt. Oscar had locked Dylan in one of the storage buildings as punishment. He had managed to get his hands on a phone that another member had hidden. He said, "Please, you need to call the police now. They are going to do it tomorrow night." I called the Cold Lake RCMP immediately. I explained everything. They said they would send officers out to the compound right away. I asked if I could go with them. They said absolutely not. This was a police matter. I waited at my hotel in Cold Lake. I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Dylan's daughter, about all those people who had been convinced that dying was the same as ascending. The police raided the compound around 8 in the evening on November 20th. I found out later what they encountered. Most of the group, 23 people, were in the main building lying on the floor unconscious. They had ingested a mixture of sedatives and painkillers mixed into fruit juice. 4 people were already dead, including Brother Oscar himself. He had taken a larger dose than the others. The police called ambulances and started administering first aid. They were able to revive most of the survivors. Dylan was found locked in the storage building. He was physically okay, but hysterical. His daughter Claire was one of the survivors. She was unconscious but alive. In the days following the raid, I interviewed several of the survivors in the hospital. Most of them were confused and angry that they had been saved. They said they had been ready to ascend. They said the police had ruined everything. One woman told me that Brother Oscar had promised them they would wake up in paradise, that their earthly suffering would be over. She said she had been looking forward to it. She said she wished the police had arrived just an hour later because then it would have been too late to save her. Claire survived, but she never spoke to her father again. She refused to see him in the hospital. She blamed him for calling the police, for destroying her chance at salvation. Dylan told me later that she eventually moved away and changed her name. He said he had tried to contact her, but she would not respond. He said he saved her life and she hated him for it. The 4 who died were ruled suicides. No charges were filed against any of the survivors. The group disbanded. The compound was sold. I wrote a series of articles about the Ascension Fellowship that were picked up by national news outlets. I won an award for investigative journalism. But I could not stop thinking about what one of the survivors had said to me in the hospital. She had looked me in the eyes and said, "You do not understand. We were not afraid. We were not being forced. We wanted this. We believed, and you took that away from us." That is the thing about belief. When it is strong enough, it becomes indistinguishable from reality. These people were not crazy. They were not stupid. They were looking for meaning, for purpose, for something bigger than themselves, and Brother Oscar gave them that. He gave them certainty in an uncertain world. He gave them a community that accepted them. He gave them a story in which they were the heroes. And when he told them it was time to die for that story, most of them were willing. I left journalism 6 months later. I could not keep writing about tragedies like they were just stories, because they were not stories. They were real people making real choices based on real beliefs that I could not understand. And I started to wonder about my own beliefs, about what I would be willing to die for, about how I could be sure that anything I believed was actually true. Sometimes I drive past where the compound used to be. The buildings have been torn down. The land is empty, but I think about those 23 people lying on the floor waiting to ascend. I think about Brother Oscar, who died believing he would wake up somewhere better. I think about Claire, who will never forgive her father for saving her life. And I think about belief and how it can be the most beautiful thing in the world or the most dangerous, and how it is almost impossible to tell the difference until it is too late. My name is Patrick, and I have been flipping houses for almost 15 years. I started in Calgary but moved to Medicine Hat in 2015 because the property prices were better and there was less competition. My business model is simple. I buy foreclosed or distressed properties at auction, fix them up, and sell them for a profit. Most of the time it is straightforward work. Replace the flooring, paint the walls, update the kitchen and bathrooms, maybe fix some structural issues. I have seen houses in terrible condition. I have seen houses filled with garbage and filth. I have seen houses where people clearly left in a hurry, leaving behind their belongings like they were fleeing something. But I had never seen anything like what I found in the basement of 427 Kingsway Avenue until September of 2017. The property came up at a foreclosure auction. It was a small bungalow built in the 1960s, nothing special. The previous owner was a man named Harper, who had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. He had been running some kind of investment scheme, and when it collapsed, he lost everything. The bank seized his house and put it up for auction. I won the bid for $60,000, which was a good price even for Medicine Hat. The house needed work, but the bones were solid. I figured I could flip it in 3 months and make a decent profit. I started the renovation in early September. The main floor was unremarkable: dated wallpaper, old carpet, a kitchen from the 1980s. Standard stuff. I spent the first week gutting the main floor and hauling debris to the dump. Then I moved down to the basement. It was unfinished, just concrete walls and floor, exposed ceiling joists, old furnace in the corner. There was a washer and dryer hookup and a small bathroom with a toilet and sink. I was measuring the space to see if I could finish it and add a bedroom when I noticed something odd about the dimensions. The basement felt smaller than it should be. I went back upstairs and measured the footprint of the house. Then I went back down and measured the basement. There was a discrepancy of about 8 feet along the east wall. I tapped on the concrete. It sounded hollow in one section. I looked closer and noticed a thin vertical line in the wall, almost invisible, like the concrete had been cut and then patched. I got a sledgehammer and started breaking through. Behind the wall was a room, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet. Concrete walls, concrete floor, no windows, a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was a metal chair bolted to the floor. The chair had restraints attached to the arms and legs, heavy leather straps with buckles. And covering the walls, pinned up with thumbtacks, were photographs. Dozens of photographs, Polaroids, all showing the same thing. Women sitting in that chair, their wrists and ankles strapped down, their faces contorted in fear or pain or exhaustion. Different women, 6 different women that I could count. The photos were numbered in the bottom corner, sequential numbers like someone was keeping a log. I felt sick. I dropped the sledgehammer and stepped back out of the room. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and called the police. I told them what I had found. They told me not to touch anything and that they were sending officers immediately. I went upstairs and waited on the front porch. I could not stay in that house. I could not be near that room. The police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers at first, then more, then detectives, then a forensics team. They spent hours in the basement photographing everything, collecting the Polaroids, taking samples. A detective named Corporal Martinez came out to talk to me. He asked me about Harper, the previous owner. I told him I did not know anything about him except that he had been arrested for fraud. Martinez said they were going to need to identify the women in the photographs. It took them 3 days. They matched 4 of the women to missing persons reports filed between 2008 and 2014. All of them had been reported missing from Medicine Hat or nearby towns. All of them were indigenous women between the ages of 20 and 35, and all of them had eventually been found alive, released somewhere in the city days or weeks after they disappeared. But none of them had reported being abducted. None of them had gone to the police. The cases had been closed as resolved when the women turned up. Martinez called me a week later and asked if I could come to the station to answer some questions. When I arrived, he took me into an interview room and showed me files on the 4 women they had identified. He explained that they had contacted all 4 and asked them about the photographs. At first, the women denied knowing anything, but when shown the photos, they broke down. All 4 admitted that they had been abducted by a man who picked them up while they were walking home late at night or waiting for buses. He had used chloroform or some kind of drug to knock them out. They woke up in that room strapped to that chair, blindfolded. The man never spoke to them. He would come into the room multiple times a day. They could hear his footsteps. They could hear the click of a camera, but he never said a word. He kept them for anywhere from 3 days to a week. Then he would drug them again and they would wake up somewhere in the city, usually in a park or an alley with no memory of how they got there. Martinez asked me why I thought none of them reported it. I said I did not know. He said shame. He said disbelief. He said these were women who already had complicated relationships with the police, women who had been marginalized and ignored their whole lives. He said they were afraid nobody would believe them. They were afraid they would be blamed. They were afraid the man would come back. So they stayed silent. They tried to forget. They tried to move on with their own lives. I asked about the other 2 women in the photographs, the ones who had not been identified. Martinez said they were still trying to find them. They had run the photos through facial recognition software and checked them against missing persons databases, but so far nothing had come up. He said it was possible those women had never been reported missing. Or maybe they had been reported but in a different jurisdiction. Or maybe they were still too afraid to come forward even now. The police arrested Harper in prison and charged him with 4 counts of kidnapping and forcible confinement. His trial was in 2018. All 4 identified victims testified. They described what had happened to them. They described the room, the chair, the blindfold, the silence. Harper sat in the courtroom expressionless the entire time. He did not react. He did not show remorse. His lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that just because the room was in Harper's house did not mean he was the one who used it. But the jury did not buy it. They convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. During the sentencing hearing, the judge asked Harper if he had anything to say, if he wanted to explain why he did what he did. Harper stood up and looked directly at the 4 women sitting in the gallery. He said, "I could have killed you. I could have done so much worse, but I let you go. I showed you mercy, and you should be grateful for that." One of the women started crying. Another one screamed at him. The judge told Harper to sit down and said his complete lack of remorse was noted. But Harper kept talking. He said, "You want to know why I let them go? Because I was not ready. I was practicing. I was learning. I wanted to see how long I could keep someone without them breaking. I wanted to see if I could make them forget it happened." And it worked. For years it worked. None of you said anything. None of you did anything. You just went back to your lives and pretended it never happened. So really, who has the power here? The judge held him in contempt and had him removed from the courtroom. But his words stayed with me. The idea that he was practicing. The idea that he was not finished. The idea that if he had not been arrested for fraud, if his house had not been foreclosed, if I had not found that room, he would still be out there doing it. And maybe next time he would not have let them go. I sold the house eventually. I had to disclose what had been found there, which tanked the value. I sold it at a loss. The new owners tore down the basement room and sealed it over with concrete. But I still think about it. I still think about those 2 women in the photographs who were never identified. I think about whether they are out there somewhere living their lives or whether something worse happened to them. I think about whether there are other rooms like that in other houses, other hidden spaces where terrible things happen and nobody knows. And I think about the victims who testified. 4 women who had to relive their trauma in front of a courtroom full of strangers just to get a conviction. 4 women who were told by the man who abducted them that they should be grateful he let them live. I think about the kind of courage it takes to come forward after years of silence, to face your abuser, to tell your story knowing that people will judge you for it. And I think about how the system failed them the first time, how if they had been believed when they first showed up alive, maybe Harper would have been caught years earlier. Maybe those other 2 women would have been found. I do not flip houses in Medicine Hat anymore. I moved back to Calgary, but every time I break through a wall or open a locked door in a new property, I hesitate for just a moment. I brace myself for what I might find. Because now I know that houses keep secrets. And sometimes those secrets are worse than anything you could imagine. My name is Adam, and I never believed in the supernatural until winter 2021. When I learned Alberta's lonely highways hold secrets some people should never see. I tell this story because it has lived inside me for years now, shaping my thoughts whenever I see a stretch of frozen road with no other headlights in sight. I tell it because someone out there needs to know that sometimes the strangest missing person cases are not over, and sometimes they do not even make sense to the living. It started on a bitterly cold night in early December. I had driven the Calgary to Edmonton corridor what felt like 1,000 times before, sometimes for work, sometimes to see family. That night, I was alone in my car fighting exhaustion after too many hours awake, and the only thing that kept me focused was the steady rumble of the tires and my own nervous energy. The snow had been coming down for hours, blanketing the road, swallowing up the taillights ahead of me one pair at a time. Traffic had thinned by Red Deer, and the gas stations along the way seemed to glow out of the dark like distant lanterns. I stopped at one such gas station halfway between Red Deer and Edmonton, needing to stretch my legs and fill up the tank. The place felt deserted, insulated from the wind with nothing but the buzz of old fluorescent bulbs and the smell of burnt coffee to make you remember civilization existed. As I stepped back outside, I noticed someone standing under the awning, young, brushing snow from her hood, eyes downcast. I almost passed by, but she looked up and smiled as I walked to my car. "Headed north?" she asked softly. Although I had been taught to avoid picking up hitchhikers, there was something about the way she stood there. No luggage, just a small leather satchel, frost clinging to her boots, that made me hesitate. In that moment, it felt wrong to leave her standing in the cold. She did not seem desperate, just exhausted. I nodded and unlocked the passenger door. "Going as far as Edmonton," I said. She climbed in wordlessly, buckling herself in with a clipped rhythm that made me think she was cold through to the bone. We did not talk much at first. She told me her name was Penelope, and that she was heading home after a long time away. Her voice was strange, soft, almost melodic, with a kind of careful politeness that felt out of time. I kept glancing at her, wondering why she was so calm, why she was out here alone on such a night. She asked me odd questions about my family, whether I had ever lost touch with someone and tried for years to reconnect, whether I believed in closure. Her eyes fixed on the snow outside, watching the patterns swirl against the glass. "You do a lot of driving?" she wondered. "More than enough," I said. "I know this road almost too well." The conversation drifted into silence. Just past Panoka, as the road arched along the edge of the forest, Penelope spoke again. "Do you ever get the feeling that something is following you, trying to catch up after years and years, and if you stop for even a second, it will reach you and everything you know will change?" I laughed nervously, half in jest, half to dispel the tension I felt building in my chest. She did not smile. "Some things are not meant to be found," she added softly, pressing her fingers against the window. We drove in silence again, and I could not shake a sense of heaviness. A little after midnight, I stopped at another gas station for coffee. Penelope stayed inside the car while I went in. It was one of those places plastered with lost dog flyers and missing person posters. Faces staring back from faded paper, some dating back 20 years. As I scanned the posters, idly at first, then focusing as one particular photo caught my eye. A young woman, dark-haired, earnest expression, faded blue coat. The caption read, "Missing Penelope R. Last seen November 2003, Red Deer, Alberta. Age when missing 22. Height 5'5". Family still searching?" My mind reeled. The photo looked exactly like the woman waiting in my car, except the poster was nearly 2 decades old. I bought my coffee with trembling hands, desperately telling myself it was some kind of coincidence. Back in the car, I glanced over at Penelope. She was awake but staring straight ahead, features illuminated in the shifting glow from oncoming headlights. I drove on, unable to speak, wondering if I should say something. My nerves screamed at me to ask questions, but the silence from the passenger seat kept me frozen in place. Just north of Leduc, snow began falling harder, reducing visibility until it felt like the world was closing in around us. Suddenly, Penelope shifted, turned to look at me. "Thank you for picking me up," she said gently. "I did not want to be alone tonight. I do not like the dark anymore. I used to feel safe out here, but now I know what the dark is." I felt a chill. "You live in Edmonton?" I asked, voice shaky. She gave a small, almost sad smile. I used to. We were nearing the city when Penelope closed her eyes and leaned her head against the window. As we passed through the last stretch of forest before Edmonton, I glanced over. Her seatbelt was still buckled, her breathing shallow. I felt strangely protective, as though her vulnerability demanded I keep her safe until morning. Just as we hit the city limits, I saw flashing police lights beside the highway. A cruiser was parked at the intersection where I planned to turn. I stopped cautiously, giving way to the officers who appeared to be searching the woods with flashlights. Penelope turned to look at them. "Sometimes people are looking for something they will never find," she whispered. As I drove on, I dared to finally speak. "Does your family know where you are?" She looked at me for a moment, her gaze clear and achingly sad. "I think they hope I am still out there somewhere, waiting for a way to get home." Before I could respond, she began to hum a familiar melody, one my own mother used to sing when I was a child. The sound was so intimate and so strange coming from a near stranger that it made me grip the wheel harder. When I reached her requested drop-off, a quiet suburban street near the university, she stepped out calmly, thanked me once more, then walked into the shadows between two snowbanks. I watched her go, waiting to see whether she would turn toward one of the houses or disappear completely. But just as I lost sight of her, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for taking me home. Please drive carefully." I blinked, confused, then tried to call the number. It was disconnected. When I checked the seat where she had been, her seatbelt was still fastened. Her breath had left a faint patch on the window, but there were no footprints in the fresh snow. Nothing to suggest she had even opened the door. Haunted, I called the number listed on the missing person poster. A woman answered, an older voice, kind, restrained by years of waiting and searching. "Hello, you have reached Penelope's mother," she said. I stammered for a moment, unsure how to explain. Finally, I told her I had just given a young woman a ride from Red Deer to Edmonton tonight, and that she had looked exactly like the photograph on the poster. I apologized, saying perhaps it was someone with a resemblance. There was a long silence. "Penelope disappeared in November 2003, her mother said quietly. "We have never stopped hoping, but every year around this time someone calls us saying they saw her, gave her a ride, spoke to her. It started after the first anniversary. My husband got a letter in the mail once. No return address, saying, 'I am safe, thank you.' There were words only she used. 'What do you think is happening?' I asked. Her mother hesitated, then said, 'People say there are places in Alberta where the past does not stay buried, where lost things drift through the snow looking for someone to bring them home. I do not know if you saw my daughter. I do not know if anyone ever really does, but thank you for calling. Thank you for not letting her story be forgotten.' After our conversation, I became obsessed with Penelope's case. I spent hours reading everything I could online. Witness statements, family interviews, small articles in local papers that repeated the same hopeless cycle. A bright young woman gone without a trace, last seen waiting for a bus after work. In each account, the same thread appeared. A brief moment, a cold night, a conversation with a stranger who felt compelled to tell their story. Many said she looked peaceful. Many said she said almost nothing. But the details always matched. The age, the coat, the song. I joined forums dedicated to missing persons, contacting anyone who had seen Penelope in their dreams or in life. Some accounts stretched back years, some as recent as last winter, all orbiting the same truth. Penelope never returned in any normal way, yet her presence haunted the highways between Red Deer and Edmonton. I even found dashboard camera footage from several years before, posted anonymously on a message board. The video showed a young woman walking along the snowy shoulder in the dead of night, only to vanish as a car passed. Some commented that the stretch of road where she disappeared lined up with the place she was last seen in 2003. My own dash cam from that night showed nothing, just snow, silence, and emptiness in the passenger seat. But every so often when I replay the footage, I hear the faint sound of someone humming, layered beneath the wind and static. Since then, every year I receive a letter addressed to me with no return address. The handwriting matches the old missing person posters. Inside, always the same 3 sentences. Thank you for taking me home. Please remember me. Drive safely in the snow. I keep each letter in a box in my closet next to the photograph of Penelope from her missing poster. Each time I glance at it, I feel a mixture of dread and relief, a secret kept alive by repetition, by memory, by the kindness of strangers who choose not to forget. I do not know what happened to Penelope. I do not know if the woman I picked up was a ghost, a hopeful illusion of unresolved grief, or something stranger. A lost soul waiting for a ride in the dark Alberta winter. But since that night, I have pulled over more times than I can count at the edge of empty highways, searching for faces that do not belong, hoping for closure that never comes. What I am certain of: Alberta's highways keep their mysteries, and for some, the journey home is never really over. Whether that journey ends with headlights reaching out through the snow or with a stranger's voice breaking the silence is not always up to the living. And sometimes the greatest kindness you can offer is to remember, to drive on, and never to let the story vanish completely into the night.